All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Thursday, December 9 here. I want to welcome you to our cybersecurity workshop. My name is William Pote. My partner and I own and run eTop Technology. We're a managed IT service provider here in Redlands, California, serving the greater Inland Empire area. We've been in business about 10 years now and really focus on having really great relationships with our clients and only having the right clients. So what we're going to do here is we're going to spend 15-ish minutes going into some of what the problem is, some of what you can do about it, and how possibly we might be able to help. So we're glad you're here and taking a chance to listen. So who's at risk? Some of the biggest names in the country are at risk. I didn't put Facebook on here because they changed their name and I couldn't handle putting Meta or whatever it was on who's at risk. But we have Twitch, who's owned by Amazon. They basically had almost every single record breached at one point this year. CNA, they actually do cyber liability insurance. They were held ransom for $40 million, and that's what they paid. The initial ransom was, I believe, $60 million, and I think $40 million was the largest single payout from a company in this year. The funny part about the insurance company is that they're one of the bigger providers for cyber liability insurance. So I do find it a little bit ironic that they were breached and paid out $40 million. So part of what that ransom covered was not just getting their data back. So they had backups and were able to restore back into production. But the company that ransomware them did not just hold their data hostage. They had a copy of their data that they had exfiltrated from the company, and the part of the ransom was to cover them not releasing it out into the dark web. So Geico, California Controller's Office, Colonial Pipeline, I know everyone's heard of that one, basically shut down the gas flow for the East Coast for pretty close to a week. Some really big names, really big issues, but they're big companies. That doesn't apply to us. We're small fish, right? Well, no, small companies are impacted as well. So in fact, most small companies are actually at a greater risk than the larger companies because they just don't put the budget, time, training, and they don't develop the technical competency that they need to be safe. Yes, the bigger companies are bigger fish and they will put in more time to going after them, but they also have a full security team that's helping protect the company. For a small company of 5 to 150 or 200 users, you may not be able to afford an entire security team to just work on your business. What type of risks are there? So ransomware, breaches, phishing, these put your customers at risk, not just you. There's a huge amount of opportunity risk, a lot of reputation risk. There's financial liability. We're seeing just a massive rise in cybercrime. I mean, since we started almost 10 years ago, just every single year, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And they're saying ransomware is expected to top $265 billion a year by 2031. Short story that goes into how small companies are impacted. Back in May this year, a company we had just started onboarding, the owner was phished, and as a result, the person who reached into his account was in the account for a 1 hour time period. So about 1 hour. In that 1 hour, they were able to email back to the staff accountant and tell them, hey, we need you to wire off $580,000 to another account. And within an hour period, that happened. We'd seen that there was potentially an issue. We talked to their operations director. And within that 1 hour period, we were able to block the account, remediate any issues that for going forward, enable multi-factor, which was on the roadmap to be done in the next week or two anyway. But they still wired out $580,000 in a 1 hour period. Good news, we were able to work with their forensics team, their cyber liability insurance, and their E&O for them to actually recover almost all of that $580,000, and whatever wasn't recovered was covered by the E&O insurance. We also were able to work with the cybersecurity team at Palo Alto, Unit 42, review everything that had been done, and realize that what we had done was absolutely spot on. So we were able to work with them, give them all of the information, all of the logs, and help move this investigation forward. But this is a 13-person company. That's not a big company. How much of an impact would that have on your company if you wired off $580,000? This is why security matters so much. Current states of affairs, again, as I said, one of the biggest issues that I see us running into is the financial and reputational cost to your business. And we're seeing really large increases in supply chain attacks in the first quarter of 2021. And realistically, this entire year has just been attack after attack after attack. So supply chain attack in technology is like SolarWinds or Kaseya, where the government's using one of the SolarWinds products, and then SolarWinds gets breached. That then flows into all of the different people or entities that are using that software. So this impacts and affects everyone. So what should you do? That's a great question. There's a lot of different things that your business should do or can do to really understand how to protect yourself. So we're going to go over a couple of different steps here. So there's two different determines. So you determine your company's cybersecurity status. Have you done anything? What have you done? Just determine who's the responsible party for your cybersecurity. You need to take an inventory of your business, understand like what your applications are, what your data looks like, what's the sensitivity. And a lot of small businesses I talk to say, oh, we don't have sensitive data, but then you start digging into what they actually have. They've been storing credit cards in plain text in their environment. They might have social security numbers of all of their different employees. They have all of their customer information in there. The reality is we all have a lot of sensitive data. What are you doing to protect it, and who has access to it? And then really one of the bigger steps here is deciding what are your business capabilities? Do you have the capability for rolling out a cybersecurity plan? What measures are you going to take or enact to protect your business? And then who's going to manage it? Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to bring in that IT person to manage your security and your network, or are you going to outsource it? So some really easy preventative first steps: firewalls, antivirus, backups. These are all part of kind of the security onion. Each one of these things in and of itself isn't going to protect your business, but when you start layering on different security applications, it's going to really make it much harder for them to get the bad guys to get in and take ownership or control of your business. There's really two big things here that are important and have probably the biggest impact on your business protecting. Two big things here. So for me, one of the biggest things is multi-factor authentication. So what is multi-factor? It's that second step. So passwords are what you know. So, my super good password at your website. And then that second step is something you have. Typically it's, a security key, your phone, a text. Having that second factor really makes it much harder, because while the bad guys might get your password, they'd have to have this as well to get into the system. And then user education. In my opinion, that's really high up there as to being one of the number one things you can do to protect your organization in a security incident. You really need people to look up and go, does that make sense? And the more people look up and say, does that make sense, or is this right? You need people that are going to question what's going on, because if they don't, they're just going to click on that link and enter their password because they need that document from accounting, and now somebody's emailing out on your behalf. Some really great best practices here. I know there's a lot. The reality is IT best practices, security best practices. The list is probably 1,000 times that big. Some kind of high points here: use strong passwords, multi-factor, enable controls that isolate stuff to only coming from your network. We're moving more and more of our personal tool set to only being able to access from certain locations or equipment that's been guaranteed good. Investing, like IT and security, are an ongoing investment. There's no longer the being able to buy something once and have it be good for the life of 5 years or 10 years. This is an ongoing game of whack-a-mole. So you need to invest in security systems, security people, and then just maintaining this. Talk to your IT department, or your managed service provider. The more you talk to them, the more you understand and can relate to what's going on, the better they can help you. Because if we know what's going on inside your organization, the better we can tune and manage your security. I'd really recommend embracing education and training. There's a lot of really great tools out there that you can bring in to actually do user education when it comes to security. I would recommend developing an incident response plan. Doesn't have to be very long. Ours happens to be 15 pages, but we're also dealing with potentially a very complicated issue if something happens to us. And then continuity and disaster recovery plans. To me, an incident response plan is how you act and how you react in the face of something going wrong. A continuity and disaster recovery is what you do while you're going through that response. So, like on Tuesday, for example, Amazon Web Services went down for 8 hours. We weren't able to access several of our tools because they went down. So our continuity plan went into how does our team respond and work around the system being down. Those are really big steps towards moving forward in best practices and being secure. At this point, we would love, if we can help implementing the right approach, we'd love to. Here's our contact information. Are there any questions? I'd love to answer any questions I can. You
so
can put
BJ,
them in the chat. Yeah, hey Mo, what's up?
what's up? One of the things that somebody actually asked is if they actually need a firewall if they have a good antivirus.
You know what? Yeah, it's all part of the layered approach to security. Next gen antivirus in and of itself is never going to protect you from everything. A firewall is never going to protect you from everything. We're working with a lot of managed threat response and early detection. Those tools are constantly looking for things that just don't make sense in your environment. But by themselves, it's not enough. So the more we can layer in the security tools, the better your results will be.
So one of the things that we see is that now software like Windows, Mac, they also have their own firewall. Is it necessary to have an additional device, and why?
Sure. So the firewall is simply protecting your device, and it's also not it's not centrally managed. So there's no way that a company like ours can review what's happening on your individual device at the device level. When you route all of the traffic through a managed firewall, part of what the value that adds is it actually can break apart the traffic and actually it's scanning every piece of it. So like 80% of the traffic on the web these days is SSL encrypted. Your Windows firewall isn't scanning that traffic, but the firewall that we would recommend putting in place does. And if your team is extremely remote, there's also ways to not even have a physical firewall, but still scan that traffic.
Now, with dual-factor authentication, is it necessary to be changing passwords?
Actually, these days, the overall recommendation is to not change passwords unless there's a known breach. So as we've been working through scenarios with our clients, our recommendation is make sure people have a really good passphrase. So something long, probably at least 12 or 15 characters long. Doesn't need to even be wildly complicated, but if you throw in a capital, two separate words, we can, or help implementing might be a good one. Add a couple of numbers, add a special character. It doesn't need to look like hacker speak. The reality is as long as there's not a recommended, sorry, get my brain going again. As long as there's not a known breach on that password, we're recommending not changing it. So,
Okay.
and actually, if you look at the NIST recommendations, what we're doing is following right in line with that. Changing your password too frequently actually causes a lot of fatigue.
Okay.
So,
And I have another question here, actually. If I already have an IT team, what do you recommend I should do in order to keep them updated with these recent trends you just mentioned?
oh goodness, talk to them. Make sure that you're honestly, as an owner, you need to be paying attention to some of these trends on your own and bringing them up to the team. Realistically, just talking to them is going to make a big difference in your outcomes, because if they know that you're concerned about security, most IT people are very interested in and want to be secure, but they feel like they don't get the buy-in from ownership. So as long as ownership's pushing, um, as long as the business owner is pushing to be more secure, then it's a lot easier for IT to do our job, because if you have that buy-in is everything.
And I have another question here. If my email is encrypted, let's say Office 365, is it safe to send credit card payments information or password via email? That's a great question.
Generally, I would say no, unless you're going through like an actual encrypted platform. So like sending an encrypted email where they have to log in and get it. Even then, I really don't like sending, especially credit card information. I'd really recommend having that go into like a portal. So go straight into the credit card processing portal versus going into an email, because most of the time that email is just going to sit there. And if that person gets phished, now they can see, Nathan's email or credit card. That's the last thing we want, is somebody being able to get into my email and see that credit card information. And then as far as passwords, we recommend using something like Password Push, pwpush.com, or if you want to use ours, it's pwpush.etop.tech. You can actually put your password into an expiring link, and that expiring link basically lets somebody view it 4 or 5 times, and expire after a week. So if you email them that link, and somebody gets into your email a week from now, they can't click into it and figure out what the password is. So that's how we actually send passwords out to our customers when we reset things. So that expiring link is very important, in my opinion.
Excellent. Another question here is, what happened if my data has been compromised and it was backed up? Am I going to be able to restore my data?
It was backed up.
Yes.
I'll say a lot of that's going to depend on who you're backing it up with, and the length of time that the attacker has been inside your environment. We've actually seen ransomware attacks where the attacker gets in and moves laterally inside your organization and sits there for 30, 60, 90 days. So that way, if you don't have so when they fire off, all of your backups have been infected. So when you restore, you potentially are bringing them back into your environment. Probably the best ways to avoid that would be standing up a brand new environment and restoring your data after it's been scanned into the new environment. The answer is you should be able to. You should be able to.
I have another question here. Every time somebody comes into my office, we share the wireless password. Should I be doing something different?
I think it depends on who it is. If you're sharing it with every single guest that comes into your office, I'd recommend setting up a guest network. Realistically, probably the best path forward, and this can be more complicated, is setting it up so everyone has to log in with like their computer credentials. So they would log in with William Pote at etoptechnology.com and my password to the wireless environment. That way it's completely unique. You actually don't have a password to share. Realistically, most people, if you keep a corporate wireless LAN separate from your guest one, share the guest one as much as you want. When we set it up, we really secure it. We really lock down how much bandwidth it uses. That way it leaves the majority of your company resources to, the company. But you still can hand out a guest network freely, in my opinion.
Okay. And let's see, we have the last question here. So how do I know if somebody actually has been in my network?
Usually you see outcomes happening that you don't want. As a competitor suddenly is doing a much better job at guessing what you're doing. That's a really complicated question. I'm not sure. Reality is if you have most of the proper security tools in place, those tools are telling you. So it's reviewing logs, it's understanding what the logs mean. And this is part of why actually adding on a security operations team is extremely important, because effectively you're dumping every single log across your entire environment to a company that's basically just reviewing what's going on. And that's one of the best ways to actually determine, is somebody in my network that shouldn't be? Bob is suddenly logging into the network at 2:00 in the morning from China. Probably not accurate. Let's go ahead and lock that down. So
that's something interesting also that you may want to touch on. How effective is geofencing, right? For people
sure.
actually logging into the environment.
So geofencing is one of the better ways to stop just straight brute force attacks. That being said, most bad actors or threat actors have access to IP addresses inside the United States. We tend to lock down the vast majority of the threat countries. So like Russia, China, a lot of Eastern Europe. We find that if we lock it down too much to like Europe, that can start causing problems because some services do interact with Europe in order to function properly. But yes, we really do recommend as much extra security as you possibly can, because it just, again, it's one of the layers. It's not a silver bullet, but it's another layer. But
excellent.
Yeah, it's a security is, an onion might be 50 layers. Security is probably 100, but that even goes into policy and procedure. But that's probably something for another time. But
excellent.
If there's any other questions,
at the top of the hour,
right? No, I can probably ramble on for 2 more minutes. Any other questions from the crowd? Love to answer them. What factors can cause? Oh, yikes! That's a big question. Oh goodness, which factors can cause vulnerabilities to companies? I mean, there's a lot. Weak passwords, lack of training, lack of investment into understanding what technology can do for you, not updated computers, not updated servers. I mean, the list is probably, yeah, it's very long. Where should you start focusing on? At which point in my business development process do you think I should start focusing on cybersecurity? Honestly, sooner than later. I think all of us are required nowadays to develop technical competency and basic security competencies. And if we don't do it, you don't necessarily have to have a crazy strong cybersecurity plan, but there's a lot of the things that I mentioned earlier that if you just do from the very beginning, it's just the expectation. You're not having to go through and change stuff hardcore down the road. Like taking a company that's got a 4-character password to a 20-character password is a really big deal. But if you start out from the very beginning with, hey, we all use complicated passphrases, we all use multi-factor, it's a lot easier to turn that ship. So I don't think it has to be a complicated plan. I just think everything needs to have, it needs to be in the back of the mind. So
more comprehensive.
Yeah, and it can always be added on to as you go. Like if you start with some basics, you're in a better place than if you just yeah, if you start with the basics, you're at a better place than just starting with literally nothing and fixing it in 2 or 3 years. Because that's oftentimes what we see is usually we'll come in as a company's grown a lot in the first 3 or 4 years and they're like, oh my goodness, the world's burning and falling down. How do we fix it now? And it's a lot bigger of a band-aid to rip off. So, but
Excellent.
cool. Right on.
I
Well,
don't think any more questions. And we are
perfect.
on the top of the hour.
Right on. Well, I appreciate everyone for coming. We'll go ahead and also send out we'll send out a recording to the webinar later, and we appreciate each and every one of you. But benefits that can be provided by an intrusion detection system, it goes back to just knowing that something's happening. Like if you know that there's a breach or detect an intrusion happening, you can fix it. Otherwise, it's just happening. So,
Right.
yeah, realistically, you really want to make sure that yeah, you're detecting what's going on, because if you're not, you'd have no idea. It's just happening to you. But right on. I appreciate everyone, and thank you all for coming, and have a great week. Great Christmas
Thank
holiday.
you.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.